Welcome back for another deep dive.
Always exciting.
Today, we're going to be tackling Bertrand Russell
Oh, wow.
and his views on religion and civilization.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting.
I think interesting is an understatement.
We're looking at his essay, what was it again? Has religion made useful contributions to civilization?
Yeah, that's the one.
And we've also pulled in some additional historical and philosophical background because this is Russell.
Right. You need the context.
You can't just jump into him.
No.
So I'm sure it'll be a fascinating journey.
I have no doubt.
So I was surprised to
Oh.
find that Russell actually gave some credit
Uh,
to religion for its contributions to civilization.
Well, he was a nuanced thinker.
Yeah.
Even though he was deeply critical of organized religion, he could still acknowledge its role in the development of, things like the calendar.
Calendar.
Yeah, and the ability to predict eclipses.
Ah, okay.
Which, those are pretty significant achievements when you think about it at the time.
It's true. We don't really think about that.
No, we take those things for granted.
To go from being terrified of an eclipse,
Like it's a sign of the apocalypse.
right, to actually understanding.
And being able to predict it.
Yes.
That's a major leap forward in knowledge. I think it shows the power of human observation and analysis, even when it's within a religious framework.
I agree.
And that's a theme I think we'll see a lot in this deep dive. This tension between faith.
And reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how that tension has shaped civilization.
Interesting. Okay, so religion's role in early scientific advancements, that's interesting.
It is.
But then he immediately goes into a critique of organized religion,
Oh, yeah. He doesn't hold back.
contrasting it with the teachings of, the founders of these religions. He seems especially focused on Christianity.
Well, he uses this really interesting example, contrasting Christ's teachings on poverty,
Okay.
nonviolence, and adultery with the actions
Historical actions.
of the church.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, like Christ advocated against organized worship and punishment for adultery, but, those ideas don't always align with what Christian institutions have actually practiced throughout history.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it really makes you wonder how these messages get distorted over time
Yeah.
and how much power plays a role in all of that.
Absolutely. And this isn't just specific to Christianity. Russell brings up Buddhism, too. He points out that Buddha himself, who was all about peace and enlightenment,
Right.
might be a little surprised by some of the actions of certain Buddhist sects over the years.
So interesting.
History is full of these kinds of contradictions.
Right. So I guess the question is, are institutions
Uh-huh.
just inherently prone to kind of straying from the original intentions of their founders? Is that just what happens when you get power and organization involved?
That's the million-dollar question. It's definitely worth thinking about. And it leads us to another one of Russell's big critiques: the impact of organized religion on intellectual and moral progress.
I was just about to say, that seems to be a recurring theme in his work. Like, he seems to think that this concept of absolute truth,
Yeah.
especially as wielded by religious authorities, can be a big roadblock to advancement in any area, really.
Right, and he uses the perfect example of that, Galileo.
Ah, okay. The church wasn't exactly thrilled with his ideas, were they?
No, not at all. They opposed his heliocentric model
Which basically said,
that the Earth revolves around the sun, which of course directly contradicted the church's geocentric view,
right,
that everything revolved around the Earth. And that was a view that was, deeply intertwined with their understanding of God's creation and humanity's place in the universe.
Ah, I see. So it wasn't just a scientific debate.
No.
It was a challenge to the entire foundation of their authority.
Exactly. And how they responded to Galileo silencing him, putting him under house arrest, I think that really speaks volumes about how far institutions will go.
To protect themselves?
Yeah, to protect their power, their version of truth, the whole structure they've built.
It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is. And, Russell argues that this resistance to new ideas wasn't just limited to science. He saw it in the church's opposition to thinkers like Darwin and Freud as well. I mean, Darwin's theory of evolution completely challenged the biblical account of creation. And Freud's psychoanalysis questioned the notion of, a purely rational, God-fearing self.
Wow. So basically, any idea that threatened the church's worldview
Was met with resistance or complete suppression.
He makes organized religion sound like a real enemy of progress.
He even tells the story about Pope Gregory the Great, who, believe it or not, scolded a bishop for teaching grammar. He thought studying secular subjects would distract from religious devotion.
That's wild.
Right, so you have this fear of knowledge, of anything that falls outside the accepted doctrine, and that just stifles curiosity and limits human potential. That's what Russell was worried about.
So if we're seeing a pattern here,
Yeah.
it seems like Russell sees organized religion as this force that can really hold us back.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair assessment. He saw it as more concerned with maintaining power and control than actually seeking truth or promoting well-being.
It's interesting, though, because he was writing this
When was it again?
early 20th century, right?
Yeah.
Which was a time,
Of immense upheaval.
2 world wars,
Mm.
just devastation everywhere.
Right. So his views were definitely shaped by the horrors of that era. He was skeptical of any institution that could be used to justify violence and suffering.
Especially in the name of righteousness.
Exactly.
Which brings us to what is maybe the most controversial part of his critique.
What's that?
His views on Christianity's perspective on sex.
Yes. That's where things get especially provocative, even today, I think. He really believed that this whole concept of sin, particularly around sex, had a hugely negative impact on individuals and society as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, he was criticizing the church for promoting virginity as the ideal, for viewing marriage as just a way to avoid burning in hell, rather than like a celebration of pleasure and connection. It was all about procreation, not pleasure.
Right.
And then there's his stance on birth control. He was pretty adamant that the church's opposition to it was contributing to women's suffering.
He was. He felt very strongly that it limited women's choices, limited their sexual pleasure, and essentially maximized childbirth, which wasn't always a good thing, especially at that time.
He didn't hold back, that's for sure.
No, he didn't. He didn't mince words. And it's interesting because he connects all of that, the sin and the suppression of desire, to this deeper issue of punishment.
Oh, okay.
That there's this underlying need to punish, even when that punishment leads to suffering. He uses the example of children born with congenital syphilis.
Oh, wow.
And argues that this desire to see sinners punished, even if it means innocent children suffer, that's just a warped moral compass.
That's a very powerful example. It makes you think about the real consequences of certain beliefs, even the ones that claim to be rooted in love and goodness.
Right. Are we so focused on punishment that we lose sight of compassion?
That's the question he's asking, isn't it?
I think so. He's pushing us to really examine those ethical implications.
Yeah. Wow, this deep dive is already getting pretty intense.
We're just getting started.
And we've barely scratched the surface of Russell's critiques.
There's so much more to explore.
So what's next?
Well, next we're going to tackle one of the biggest dilemmas in philosophy, the problem of evil. How can a benevolent, all-powerful God exist in a world filled with so much suffering?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is, but Russell has some interesting things to say about it.
Okay, listeners, buckle up. We're about to go even deeper into the mind of Bertrand Russell. Stay tuned. Okay, so we left off talking about how some of Russell's criticisms of Christianity, especially when it comes to sex, might still raise some eyebrows today.
Definitely still relevant.
But now we're getting into like a whole other philosophical arena.
Right.
The problem of evil.
Yes.
This classic question of how do you reconcile the idea of a loving, all-powerful God with the reality of suffering?
It's a question that's been around for centuries. Theologians, philosophers, everyone's grappled with it. And for Russell, it was especially troubling, especially after living through the horrors of the 20th century. 2 world wars, unimaginable suffering.
Right.
It made him question everything.
And he even kind of gives this thought experiment
Oh, yeah.
for listeners like, imagine walking through a children's hospital ward,
Mhm.
seeing all that pain.
It's heartbreaking.
Can you really reconcile that with the idea of a benevolent God? It's powerful imagery.
Very powerful. It's not just an abstract concept for him. It's about really confronting the emotional reality of suffering
I see.
and questioning whether those traditional explanations like free will or suffering as a test of faith, if they really hold up.
I can see how those wouldn't sit well with him.
Not really. He even argues that if God knew in advance about all the sins humans would commit, then creating us anyway, knowing the suffering that would follow, makes God kind of responsible for that suffering.
So the whole idea that suffering is a consequence of our free will
Right, or a test.
or punishment for sin, that just didn't resonate with him.
No, he saw it as an attempt to rationalize suffering, to make it fit into a neat little theological box. And he was very critical, especially of this idea that suffering is somehow a purification for sin.
Like it makes us better people.
Yeah, he saw that as a dangerous justification for inflicting pain.
Oh, I see what you mean.
A way to make cruelty seem righteous.
Which ties back to his strong stance against punishment that we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. It's all connected.
Okay, so if we're not supposed to just accept suffering as part of God's plan,
Hmm.
where does that leave us?
Well, this is where his ideas about a more scientific approach to ethics come in. He really believed that education, economic justice, focusing on human well-being in a very practical way,
Yeah,
those were more effective, more ethical ways to address suffering.
they're just appealing to divine will or the promise of heaven.
Exactly. And he even questioned the whole concept of the soul in its immortality.
Wait, he didn't believe in the soul?
He argued that the Christian emphasis on the individual soul actually it promoted egotism
Oh, interesting.
and hindered social virtue. It makes people focus on personal salvation
I see.
instead of collective well-being.
So it's almost like he's saying that being concerned with your own soul isn't necessarily a good thing.
It can have downsides.
Wow, that's a really different perspective.
It is.
So if focusing on the individual soul isn't the answer, then where do we find morality? Where does social responsibility come from?
Well, Russell had some fascinating ideas about the origins of religious intolerance.
Okay.
He traced it back to this Jewish concept of righteousness,
Okay.
their belief in a single, exclusive God. And he argued that this idea, when combined with the Christian belief in Christ as the only path to salvation, created a very potent mix that led to a lot of historical persecution.
Because if you believe you have the one true faith,
And everyone else is wrong.
it can create that us versus them mentality.
Exactly. And justify all sorts of terrible things.
So righteousness, even though it sounds like a good thing,
On the surface.
can actually become a justification for intolerance and violence.
Unfortunately, yes.
Wow. It's a reminder that even seemingly positive concepts can be twisted.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got this problem of intolerance.
Yes.
And then on top of that, Russell also saw this conflict between the doctrine of free will
Mm-hmm.
and the growing understanding of natural law.
Right, especially with advancements in science like materialism and evolution.
So instead of seeing human behavior solely as a product of free will,
Yeah.
he started to see it as influenced by factors beyond our control.
Biology, our environment, all these things playing a role.
It's almost like we're not entirely responsible for our own actions.
Well, he used this really interesting analogy.
Yeah.
He said, we treat a malfunctioning car more rationally than a misbehaving human.
Okay.
We don't blame a car for breaking down. We try to figure out what's wrong and fix it.
Right.
But with humans, he argued, religious beliefs often prevent us from applying that same logic.
We blame people instead of trying to understand them.
Exactly.
So maybe instead of focusing on punishment,
Which is based on this idea of free will and moral culpability.
we should be looking at the underlying causes of behavior.
The social factors, the economic factors, the psychological factors.
Trying to understand the whole picture.
Exactly. A scientific understanding of human behavior, free from religious dogma, that's what he advocated for.
That's pretty radical.
It is.
So it sounds like Russell was calling for a fundamental shift in how we view ourselves and the world,
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
moving away from blind faith and obedience.
Toward critical thinking, compassion, a real commitment to human flourishing. You got it.
But is that even possible?
That's the question, isn't it?
Can we build a just and compassionate world without some kind of higher power, without those divinely inspired rules to guide us?
Well, Russell believed that education was key.
Okay.
Teaching kids kindness, encouraging initiative, avoiding harsh punishments that could foster a more fearless and compassionate generation.
He also talked about the importance of economic justice,
Absolutely. Making sure everyone has a decent standard of living.
because poverty and inequality breed resentment and conflict.
Exactly. And remember his critique of the church's stance on birth control.
Yeah,
He saw that as contributing to overpopulation.
which just makes poverty worse.
It's all interconnected.
This is a lot to take in. I mean, it's like Russell's critique of religion is ultimately a call for a whole new way of being,
Yeah, paradigm shift.
from blindly following dogma
To really thinking for ourselves.
and choosing compassion.
Yes.
That's really powerful.
It is. And it's not just about rejecting religion altogether.
Right.
It's about being aware of the potential dangers.
And being critical of our own beliefs.
Exactly. It's about seeking a more balanced approach
Okay.
that integrates reason and compassion with faith, if that's part of your life.
Finding that middle ground.
Right. And I think it all comes down to recognizing those psychological impulses that drive us.
The fear, the conceit, the hatred.
Yes, those powerful emotions that can shape our beliefs and our behaviors. If we understand those,
We can maybe start to make better choices,
and build a better world.
where differences are respected and compassion guides our actions.
That's the goal.
That's a beautiful thought.
It is. And that brings us to the final piece of Russell's analysis.
Really, there's more.
Oh yeah, we're going even deeper.
Okay, listeners, we're going to be exploring those powerful emotions that Russell believed underpin religious belief. Fear, conceit, and hatred.
Get ready to dive into the mind of Bertrand Russell.
It's going to be fascinating. Stay with us. All right, so we're back, and we've been talking about Bertrand Russell's views on religion.
Quite a thinker.
And now we're getting to, I think, the most interesting part, which is his ideas about the psychological roots of religious belief.
Yeah, he gets into the psychology of it all.
And he identifies three key impulses.
Okay.
Fear, conceit, and hatred.
It does sound a bit intense, right?
Yeah, a little bit, but...
But remember, Russell was writing during a really tumultuous time.
Oh, right?
He saw a lot of suffering.
Through world wars.
Exactly. So while his language might seem strong,
I guess that makes sense.
it comes from a place of deep concern.
Okay, so let's break these down one by one, starting with fear. What was the connection between fear and religion, according to Russell?
Well, think about it. Throughout history, humans have always faced these powerful, unpredictable forces. Natural disasters, disease, the inevitability of death.
Yeah.
It's only natural to seek explanations, to find comfort, some sense of control in the face of all that.
To make sense of it all.
Right. And religion often provided that. It offered answers to those big, unanswerable questions.
A way to cope with those existential anxieties.
Exactly. And it's not just fear of the unknown. There's also the fear of punishment.
Right, like divine retribution.
Exactly. And religion often presented a very specific set of rules.
Do this, don't do that.
Right, with rewards for obedience and severe consequences for disobedience.
So it was a way to control behavior through fear.
Very effective, too.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about conceit? How does that fit in?
Well, Russell believed that religion, especially the Abrahamic faiths, really tapped into this deep human desire to feel important, to feel special.
Oh.
The idea that we're not just random beings on a random planet.
That we're made in God's image.
Exactly. We have a divine purpose.
We're the center of the universe.
In a way, yes. And then you add in the concept of an afterlife.
Our actions have eternal consequences.
It gives our lives this cosmic significance.
So it's not necessarily arrogance, it's more like this need to believe that our lives have meaning.
A need for significance. And that can be a powerful motivator.
It can drive us to do good.
Absolutely. But it can also lead to a sense of superiority.
Like, my beliefs are the only true beliefs.
And anyone who doesn't share them is wrong or even dangerous.
Which brings us to hatred.
The most difficult one, perhaps.
Yeah, how did Russell see religion as connected to hatred?
Well, he argued that religion often channels our hatred toward those who are different, those who don't share our beliefs.
We've seen that throughout history.
Religious wars, persecution.
It's tragic, really.
It is. And Russell saw it as a direct consequence of these belief systems that promote exclusivity.
Like my way is the only way.
Right. And anyone who deviates from that path is condemned.
Creating that us versus them mentality.
Exactly. And remember his critique of the Christian concept of sin and punishment.
Yeah.
He felt like it fostered this desire to see transgressors suffer.
That's pretty dark.
It is, but again, he was deeply affected by the violence he'd witnessed.
So is he saying that all religion is bad?
No, not necessarily. He acknowledged that religion could provide comfort and meaning.
It can bring people together.
But he was very wary of its potential for manipulation and control, its ability to stifle progress and justify cruelty.
So it's more about being aware of the potential dangers?
And being willing to question our beliefs.
To find more rational, more compassionate ways to live together.
Exactly. It's about seeking balance, I think.
Between faith and reason.
And recognizing those underlying psychological impulses.
The fear, the conceit, the hatred.
Things that drive us.
If we can understand those.
We can make more conscious choices.
And build a world based on empathy and understanding.
That's the hope, anyway.
It's a lot to consider.
It is.
Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Bertrand Russell and his complex views on religion and civilization.
We've covered a lot of ground.
From the historical contributions of religion.
To the potential dangers of blind faith.
And the deep psychological roots of belief.
It's been a challenging journey, but hopefully a rewarding one.
And remember, this is just the beginning.
Russell's work is full of incredible insights.
Keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep diving deep.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.